Hello everybody, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today we're going to be doing a little bit of gaming news. You may be wondering about the War in the Pacific footage in front of you. We are looking at the June 30th turn replay for my play-by-email game against Evoken, but this is kind of a quiet turn. The next few turns are kind of quiet. I actually have 7 turns ahead in the hopper, but I figured rather than just do another War in the Pacific episode where we talk about the game, since not a lot is going on, I figured I would use the footage I have and sort of the replay for those of you who want to watch it. It's here, but really this episode is not about this. This episode is about some gaming news, which we found out about a couple of weeks ago, but I only stumbled upon after someone posted in my Discord channel about it. Some pretty big gaming news, I think, anyway, especially if you're interested in Gary Grigsby games and this particular series, War in the Pacific. The news is that on early May, there was a post on Matrix Games forums. Matrix Games is the company that publishes War in the Pacific. They're a subsidiary of Slitherine. I think they're really all one outfit, but they use the Matrix brand on like the groggier, more hardcore games. And War in the Pacific is a game that is published by Matrix, and they have a forum there. And there was a post by someone who is, I don't know the person, but they're at least on the site, they're identified as a staff member of Matrix Games, and so, you know, I'll take that with some credibility. But there was a post in early May on the Matrix forums saying that there is a new game that they are looking for beta testers for that is built off of the War in the Pacific Admirals Edition design. I don't know what that means, and they really didn't provide any much more information other than the fact that it is a game about the Spanish Civil War. So we'll get into that, because I have some questions about a game using War in the Pacific as a baseline design for a game about the Spanish Civil War. I think there are very different conflicts, and I don't know if they translate well. But the first thing I think that is interesting is that War in the Pacific, at its core, the game engine in any event. So here's a little chronology behind the game we're watching right now. War in the Pacific Admirals Edition was released in 2009, so already it's a 16-year-old game. That being said, War in the Pacific Admirals Edition is a heavy modification of War in the Pacific, which came out in 2004. It doesn't change most of the source code, per my understanding. It was something that Henderson Designs, which was the group of folks who worked on it, basically went to Matrix, said, we'd love to make an updated version of this. Basically, let us create this mod and turn it into a game and refine a lot of the issues people had with the original War in the Pacific. But my understanding is they had to work with a lot of limitations when they did that, in terms of, like, they couldn't change key elements of the source code, the game engine, things like that. So the game itself in 2009 was already a modification of the base game, which came out in 2004. That's when War in the Pacific, The Struggle Against Japan came out. That was the game that Gary Grigsby actually worked on. He did not work on Admirals Edition. He worked on War in the Pacific, The Struggle Against Japan. But War in the Pacific, The Struggle Against Japan leveraged the game engine that Uncommon Valor did, which was the sort of South Pacific-focused War in the Pacific game, which came out in 2002. So, just to be clear, in the post, they didn't say they were using the War in the Pacific engine. They said they were using the War in the Pacific design, or they were in, you know, basically the War in the Pacific design is going to be moved over to this other conflict. So, this is all speculation, because that's literally all they shared on the forum. All they said was, we are working on a game that is using the War in the Pacific design, and it is about the Spanish Civil War. So I don't know what they mean by design, because I don't see how you translate a game about the Pacific Theater of Operations from a design point of view and lift and shift that over to Spain. The conflicts are so vastly different. You know, if you were just to say, like, War in the Pacific, but only looking at the conflict in China, I would say you need a different game, because the game itself, the design, the structure, the way it all works is so tuned to the Pacific Theater of Operations. Like, what makes War in the Pacific special? It is the WeGo setup. It is the morning and day and night phases. It's the way recon aircraft go out in the morning. They spot something. It gets reported back to a unit during the day phase. they launch a strike. It really has that cat and mouse feel all through one turn over one day, that it feels like time is progressing over that turn. And that is really important to naval combat in World War II because of the way that detection and combat work in an air combat-centric environment. That being said, that's not really relevant at all when it comes to land combat. And it actually is shown by the fact that almost all the land combat, with the exception of the amphibious landings, almost all the land combat in the game occurs after everything else is done. There's like one final phase, I don't know if it's an official phase, but there's like one final set where it's like, all right, now let's resolve land combat. And it just goes through. So like the 90% of what makes this game unique and special in this WeGo setup is, and we're looking at the June 31st? No, July 1st. Replay now. But everything that makes War in the Pacific special, I think, from a combat and playthrough and strategy point of view, is tied to this WeGo system, which I don't know how that translates into a game about the Spanish Civil War. The other stuff that makes War in the Pacific special is the stuff where, like, Grigsby reportedly said, I will never do a game like this again, because it was so absurdly detailed. It was like driving him nuts, I guess, to code it. But like people who min-max the Japanese economy and like manage how many engines are you producing, how many airframes are you producing, how much oil is being produced, how many resources are being produced, how much light industry, heavy industry, 30 different types of aircraft engines, R&D for every single aircraft in Japan. Like the ability to micro Japan's economy is another one of those things that's like, holy crap, this game is special. But like that's another element that's like, that doesn't make any sense in the context of the Spanish Civil War. Maybe some of the logistics stuff does, but even War in the Pacific's logistics and works when you're shipping the stuff across the ocean. The land movement is all very vague and not super clear in terms of how supplies move. I suppose spoilage and fortifications and things like that could be interesting. I just don't see this game translating to a Spanish Civil War game. But I got off track. I took myself away. So like from a gameplay perspective, land combat is the weakest element of War in the Pacific. The WeGo design works for a game that is Navy and air centric. That's not the Spanish Civil War, and I don't think it matters what time of day an air raid is hitting. So I don't understand how that works. In terms of the logistics, it's all very highly attuned to a sea-based logistical system for the most part in this game, and that doesn't really translate to Spain. The industry doesn't really translate to Spain in the level of fidelity that the game holds, dear. And I just don't see it. I just don't see. There's no political element in War in the Pacific, so I don't see any element of War in the Pacific's game design that makes sense in the context of a Spanish Civil War game. And maybe there's a bunch of stuff under the hood that we don't see that would be useful, but I don't see it. So I'm a little bit skeptical there. And then I would also say that when you look at what I was starting to say at the beginning is the age of this game. Like the game is based on is a modification of a 2000. The 2009 game is a modification of a 2004 game, which made sense at the time. It was only 5 years old. The 2004 game is built upon the game engine of a 2002 game. So again, they didn't say they're using the same game engine, and Lord knows they probably shouldn't, because that's a 23-year-old game engine, and that wasn't hyper modern at the time it came out. And it's built for 32-bit systems. It's built on an Windows XP background. So you're going to have to, I would assume, if you're going to launch a new game in the modern world, you're going to have to basically re-architect that engine, presumably to be brought up to 64 bits and compatible with, at the very least, Windows 10, but presumably Windows 11. I don't, what are you doing? What kind of... And do they even have access to that? Because the other piece of information that was in this post or that I've seen on the Matrix forums is it's not actually Gary Grigsby and 2x3 Games and Joel Billings working on this project. It's Henderson Designs who made the modification for War in the Pacific Admiral Edition. So unless they were given the keys to the source code to change all this stuff, I don't really know what they're doing. And then also, even if they're given access to the source code, that stuff is so old. Like, the way you compile code, I just don't even know if it would be possible to make a new game off this engine. So if you assume they're not using the engine and they're just using the design, I go back to the point of I don't know what that means, because none of the Pacific Theater design makes sense in the context of a Spanish Civil War. What I could see making sense, and there was actually a mod for this in the Matrix forums, what I could see making sense is if someone said, hey, let's take all of this and let's make it a Mediterranean game, World War II in the Med, and then refight the naval campaigns there. That actually could make some sense, and someone did make a modification of the game at one point. I don't know if they ever finished, but I remember looking through some of the stuff they were working on. It was pretty cool, where you could make a game focused on the Mediterranean that leverages a lot of how War in the Pacific works. Even though you would have to make certain changes, I think that game would be very compelling. But there's very little. I need to read my Spanish Civil War book on my bookshelf. I've had it for a while, but like, my cursory understanding of Spain is like, yeah, maybe there was some shore bombardment from some of the international warships, but generally speaking, that was not a war that is very similar at all to the Pacific Theater of Operations. And so, like, it's not even just like, oh, there are things that are different. It's that structurally this game has to be so different. I don't understand what that even means to say it's built on the War in the Pacific design. Now, if you were just telling me the team behind Henderson Designs is working on a new Spanish Civil War game, great. That could be interesting, and maybe it would make sense to take some stuff from War in the East too, or War in the West, or whatever. I don't know. Maybe you want a little more micro, and that's where the War in the Pacific stuff comes in hand. Maybe you need to, represent stuff down to the battalion level, because it's not really at the scale of the Western or Eastern Front in World War II, and that could make some sense, but it certainly doesn't reflect like a cohesive design pulled from War in the Pacific. So I don't know. This is me rambling a lot. I don't, all we know is they posted that this was under development. They asked for beta testers. There's a link in the forum that does take you to a beta tester sign up on Matrix's website. It is an unannounced game still, despite the fact that they said this. It is an early beta, so like there's a long way to go for this game before it's done. I don't know anything about it. I asked around, and the person I asked was like, "Oh, that's news to me." So like, I believe it. It looks like there's a beta sign up when you click on the link, and it looks like it's hosted on Matrix's website. And it looks like it's posted by someone who regularly posts his Matrix forum, Matrix staff. So I would have assumed this was a joke and wasn't serious if there weren't those mitigating factors. But I don't understand what this game is going to do. I don't understand how this will work. I'm excited to learn more tentatively, but I sure hope they're building it on a new engine. I sure hope it's very dissimilar to War in the Pacific, and that claiming it was built on the War in the Pacific Admirals Edition design felt like it's just hand-waving to say, hey, we worked on this project, we've got a new project, so you should be excited. Like that would be more fair, I think, than saying it's in any way resembling War in the Pacific. Because even if it's like a groggy game, the design would have to be so vastly different. Anyway, that's enough of me rambling about this update here. Suffice to say, the news is there's a game. It's apparently based on the War in the Pacific design. It's being made, I believe, by Henderson Design Studios, or at least that's what was said in the forum threads, was that it's being made by the same people who made War in the Pacific Admirals Edition. It's about the Spanish Civil War, and that's about all we know. So I guess we'll find out more soon, or maybe soon. Oh, and they're asking for beta testers for the early beta. So I assume that means the game is closer than it is further away. That being said, I did kind of forget, actually, in yesterday's turn on here, in the 2nd of July, we assaulted a Japanese position south of Quilan with some troops, and we overran them and did a decent amount of damage to that Japanese division there, kind of at least temporarily knocking out a Japanese infantry division in China. That's probably the biggest victory and event that has occurred in this series in a while, so keep note of that. I don't think there's anything else worth showing here. I actually have 3 or 4 more turns already played, so we will catch up again sooner rather than later. It's been too long since our last episode, but I figured I'd play it in front of the replays here, and we'll pick War in the Pacific up again soon. I think we'll do another episode as soon as I get my very next turn, so hopefully in the next week or so, we will have a formal War in the Pacific episode. That being said, hope you guys enjoyed the news. Let me know your thoughts below, and until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I'm out. Bye-bye.